All right, welcome to Growing Devotions for Your Daily Life. Any counselor or therapist worth their weight in salt right now will tell you that their counseling has either doubled or tripled in the amount of people in the last 15 weeks as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. For instance, husband and wives, they're spending more time together. Some of them are spending so much time together, it's more time than they've ever spent in 15 weeks ever alone with each other. And as a result, they've seen things that they don't like about each other. And as a result of the crisis, they are separating or divorcing. We have seen the child abuse greatly increase. And as a result of COVID-19 crisis, we have seen child abuse that has just skyrocketed out the roof. And then not only that, the suicide rate has increased and doubled in some cities and states as a result of the crisis that we're facing. The hunger of children has also amounted to great quantities of lack of food because of the crisis. The impatience of people has been astronomical in the fights and the shootings as a result of COVID-19. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to answer this at the end of this devotion. Did the crisis cause all of these things? True or false? The crisis caused all of these things. True or false? I'm going to answer that at the end. But before I do that, I want to talk about a man named David. Now, we don't know much about David's life prior to 14 years old, but he does give us a little glimpse at some time before he was 14 what happened to him. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, David is having a conversation with King Saul, and David is telling some of the things that happened to him out in his father's pasture. He said he was out in the pasture tending the sheep. He was a shepherd, and a lion came out of the woods, grabbed one of his sheep. David takes off running after him and grabs this lion. Now, this lion lets his sheep go and turns on David. David said he grabs the lion by the mane and jabs his knife into him and kills the lion. And just for kicks and giggles, David says to Saul, by the way, I've also killed a bear too. Now, we know this is before 14 years old when he's telling this, that this happened to him. So David went through a crisis in his life, and his crisis was a lion, and his crisis was a bear. Then we see David standing before a 9-foot tall giant, and he is the only one standing in between the Israelites and the Philistine army. David takes off running after this giant. This giant takes off running after him. David reaches into his bag. He grabs the small stone and he puts it in a sling and he starts turning it around and he sinks it deep into the forehead of the giant. The giant falls to the ground. David pulls out the giant's sword. He cuts the giant's head off. This 9-foot tall giant was a crisis in David's life. Let's jump 16 years later. David's now 30 years old. He's looking over his balcony. He's looking at his kingdom, and he looks down, and there is a woman named Bathsheba, and she's washing herself. David knows who she is. David knows she's married. He calls her up to his kingdom, up to his castle, and he sleeps with her, and he gets her pregnant. David's crisis that day was a woman who was bathing herself. Now, we see 3 crises in David's life. We can go to many more, but these are the 3 I'm going to look at. We see the crisis of a lion and a bear, the crisis of a 9-foot tall giant, and a crisis of a woman that was bathing herself out on the balcony. I asked you a question earlier, and I said this: did the crisis cause all of the things that's happening in the last 15 weeks? The husband and wife separating, the hunger that the children are going through, the abuse that the kids are facing in their homes, the suicide rate, the impatience. Did the COVID-19 crisis cause all of these things? And the answer is absolutely not. Let me explain to you what crisis does. I have a flashlight here, and I use this flashlight a lot because it is really bright, and I use it to reveal problems that I'm dealing with in dark places. Crisis is the very same thing. Crisis simply does this: it reveals what was already there. The COVID-19 crisis did not cause husband and wives to separate and divorce. They were already having problems. The crisis just turned on the light to their problems. The crisis did not cause these children to be abused. These children are home now more than ever. The abuse was already taking place. They were only home 2 or 3 hours in the evening, and they could get by with that. But now they're home 24/7. Now the guardians or parents are having more opportunity to abuse them. The COVID-19 did not cause the hunger in these children's lives. They were already hungry at home. They already had no food at home. The COVID-19 just revealed it. The suicide rate was not caused by COVID crisis. It just simply turned on the light to what was already going in somebody's heart. COVID-19 did not call impatience of people. It just already revealed what was already going on somebody's heart. So what about David? What did the lion and the bear crisis reveal about him? It revealed that a boy younger than 14 years old was not scared of an animal, that he was a good shepherd and he was there to take care of his sheep. Now, what about David and Goliath, a 9-foot tall giant? You know what this revealed about a 14-year-old boy? He could care less what man thought of him. He feared God more than he feared man. That's what was revealed. And last, was it Bathsheba's fault that she was washing out and bathing herself out on the balcony? No, that was common practice in those days. You know what that did? That crisis in David's life of Bathsheba bathing herself, you know what it did? It simply revealed the lust that was already going in David's life. 30 years old, he already had a lust problem. He had a womanizing problem. He already had this going on in his heart. That woman bathing, that crisis, simply just turned on the light to what was already going on in David's life. Let me ask you this. What crisis in your life has simply turned on the light to what's really going on in your heart? Maybe it was a car wreck or a disease. And there's things in crisis in your life that simply turn on the light to what's going on. You see, God uses crisis in this way. See, everything's hidden until there's a crisis. And then you find out who people really are. You find out what's going on inside of them. You find out how they handle a crisis, what they look like during this crisis. And you'll know a person's heart by how they get through this crisis. You see, COVID-19 didn't cause the separation of marriage. The sin that was already going on in the home caused that. The exposure to hunger, that wasn't COVID-19. These kids already didn't have any food. And David, he already had lust in his heart long before Bathsheba was washing herself. The crisis just exposed what was already going on in his life. Sometimes God brings crisis into our life to expose who we really are. Sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't. I pray you think about these things. God bless.